I was standing in the hallway of our house in Maple Grove, Colorado, holding a tablet I hadn't touched since we moved in. It was one of those forgotten things, charged once every few years, used for nothing, left in a drawer like an old receipt you can't throw away. I'd only picked it up because my phone was dead and I needed to check the garage door app. Simple reason. Normal reason. The screen woke up slow, like it was annoyed I'd bothered it. A few notifications popped in, mostly junk. Then one message slid across the top, clean, bright, and unmistakably personal. Same time tonight. Don't park in front of Emily's again. Mark noticed. My thumb stopped mid-swipe. For a second I tried to place it somewhere harmless, like my brain was reaching for a softer version of reality. A neighborhood committee thing. A surprise party. Some awkward misunderstanding. But it didn't land that way. It landed like a fact. Because it wasn't just the wording. It was the familiarity. The confidence. The assumption that Lauren would understand exactly what same time meant, and why Emily's mattered, and why Mark noticing was a problem. I stared at that little strip of text until my eyes went dry. The house was quiet in the way it always was during the day, heater clicking, fridge humming, the faint ticking of the hallway clock. Everything normal, except it wasn't. I didn't know all the details yet. I didn't have names connected to actions, or timelines, or proof stacked neatly in a folder. But I understood one thing with complete certainty. Something had broken beyond repair. And there was no way back to the life I thought I had. Before that moment, my life had felt settled in a way I once mistook for security. Not exciting, not dramatic, just predictable. I worked steady hours, came home at roughly the same time every night, and believed that consistency was its own kind of promise. Lauren and I talked about plans the way married people do when they think time is abundant. Next summer. In a few years. When things slow down. Nothing urgent, nothing fragile. Weekends were routines. Groceries on Saturday mornings. Yard work if the weather held. A drink on the back porch as the sun dropped behind the trees. We talked about small things, neighbors repainting fences, whose turn it was to host the block barbecue, whether the HOA rules were getting stricter or just louder. It all blended together into something that felt permanent simply because it repeated. Maple Grove was like that. Quiet streets, similar houses, familiar faces that never demanded much from you. We waved. We exchanged pleasantries. We learned names without learning lives. Emily lived 3 doors down. Mark was usually out front working on something unnecessary but impressive. They were just part of the background, like mailboxes and streetlights. Looking back, the changes in Lauren didn't arrive all at once. They were small enough to excuse, easy enough to explain away if you wanted peace more than clarity. She started guarding her phone more carefully. Conversations ended faster. Some nights she came home energized, other nights withdrawn, but I told myself people are allowed to fluctuate. Everyone does. She talked more about stress. About needing space. About feeling watched in a new neighborhood where everyone noticed everything. I listened. I nodded. I believed her because believing required less effort than questioning. There were moments that should have slowed me down, but I kept moving forward instead. Her irritation toward Emily felt disproportionate. Her tension whenever Mark's name came up felt misplaced. Still, I told myself that not every reaction needs an explanation. Sometimes people just don't like other people. At the time, I thought trust meant not keeping score. I thought love meant not auditing behavior. So I didn't. I stayed busy. I stayed optimistic. I stayed deliberately uncurious. From the outside, nothing looked wrong. That's what made it work for so long. After I saw that message, I didn't do anything dramatic. I didn't sit down. I didn't call her. I didn't even move the tablet for a few minutes. I just stood there in the hallway like a man waiting for something else to change the outcome, even though I already knew nothing would. Then my mind started doing what it always does when a job goes wrong, running the timeline backward, looking for the first mistake, the first sign nobody wanted to name. All the little moments I'd filed under normal came back out of the drawer and lined up neatly. Not as isolated incidents. As a pattern. Lauren's sudden hostility toward Emily wasn't just irritation. It had edges to it. The kind that showed up in her voice when she thought I wasn't listening. The way she'd turn cold if Emily's name came up in conversation, like it wasn't a neighbor, it was a threat. I'd watched her manufacture reasons to dislike her: too nosy, too fake, too flirtatious, too much of everything, yet she could never give me one clean example that matched the intensity. And Mark. Mark was worse, because it was never direct. She'd tighten when he came up, then immediately overcorrect with a laugh and an explanation. He's always hovering. He thinks he runs the street. He gives me a weird vibe. She said it like she was protecting us from something. Like she was the one seeing danger. But now, with that message still glowing in my head, I remembered how often she mentioned him for someone who supposedly didn't care. How she'd bring him into stories that didn't require him. How she'd watch the window whenever his truck pulled into his driveway, then pretend she hadn't. And the girls' nights. That phrase had gotten more detailed over time, which I hadn't questioned because the details sounded responsible. Names. Restaurants. Plans. Safety. I'll be at Jenna's, but we might go to that new place off the highway, and if it gets late, I'll just crash there so I'm not driving tired. It was a full script, delivered before I asked any questions, like she needed the story to exist before the night did. I used to think the extra detail was consideration. Now I heard it for what it was: scaffolding. The shift wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak, either, not yet. It was something colder. Like when you realize a measurement is wrong and the whole frame is off, and you stop arguing with the tape measure. I didn't need to invent reasons anymore. I didn't need to protect her from my suspicion or protect myself from the possibility. The realization came quietly, and once it arrived, it stayed. The version of our life I'd been living was finished. The only question left was how long I'd been the last person to know. That night, after Lauren came home and moved through the house like everything was intact, I made a decision without ceremony. It didn't feel brave. It didn't feel dramatic. It felt administrative, like signing off on a change order you know is overdue. I accepted what I already knew. There was no internal argument. No second voice trying to bargain for the version of her I remembered. That part surprised me the most. I'd always assumed acceptance would come with grief attached to it, but what I felt instead was a kind of narrowing. The noise dropped out. The questions stopped multiplying. Outwardly, nothing changed. I asked the same questions. I nodded at the same answers. I stood in the same places in the kitchen and listened to the same explanations delivered in the same practiced tone. If she noticed anything different, she didn't say so. Inwardly, I stopped participating. I didn't correct her timelines when they didn't line up. I didn't press when a story arrived too polished. I didn't reassure her when she seemed to fish for it. I let statements hang exactly where she placed them, untouched. That was the shift. Not confrontation. Withdrawal. I understood then that confronting her too early would only give her something to push against. Anger creates movement. Silence creates space. And space lets things reveal themselves without being forced. So I waited. Not because I was afraid, and not because I wanted revenge. I waited because I wanted to see the full shape of what I was dealing with before I stepped away from it. I wanted clarity without distortion. Facts without theatrics. I didn't hate her in those days. Hate requires energy, and I was conserving mine. What I felt instead was distance, measured, deliberate, and growing. The marriage didn't end in that moment. But my role in protecting it did. From then on, I watched without reacting, listened without absorbing, and moved forward without announcing it. And once that decision was made, I never revisited it. Once I stopped participating emotionally, the house became easier to read. Not quieter, just clearer. I noticed how often Lauren checked the time without needing to. How her phone stayed face down, always within reach. How she started leaving rooms to take calls that never lasted more than a minute. Her schedule developed edges. Late returns clustered around the same days. Explanations shortened when I didn't ask follow-up questions, then lengthened again when silence made her uneasy. It was a rhythm, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Neighborhood gatherings were the most revealing. Barbecues, birthday parties, casual get-togethers where people drifted in and out of conversations. Lauren moved differently in those spaces now. Too alert. Too aware of who was watching. Her laughter came quicker, then disappeared just as fast. And Emily. Lauren's reaction to her stopped being abstract and became visceral. Her jaw tightened when Emily spoke. Her posture changed when she entered a room. It wasn't dislike, it was agitation. Personal. Emotional. The kind that comes from competition, not preference. Mark fit into that picture too. The tension around his name wasn't irritation. It was exposure. I watched Lauren track his movements when she thought no one noticed. I watched her relax when he left early, stiffen when he stayed late. Her moods after those nights told me more than any message could. I didn't confront any of it. I wrote things down instead. Dates. Times. Patterns. I checked statements, not obsessively, just enough to confirm what already felt obvious. Nothing explosive. Just enough misalignment to matter. What surprised me most was how quickly the tension shifted once I stayed silent. Lies need feedback. They need resistance or reassurance to survive. Without it, they start collapsing inward, forcing adjustments, improvisations. Lauren began testing boundaries, small emotional pushes, mild accusations, moments designed to provoke a response. When I didn't give her one, she escalated, then retreated, recalibrating each time. The facts kept piling up quietly. No single moment demanded action, but together they formed something solid. Something finished. I wasn't gathering evidence to punish her. I was documenting reality so I wouldn't be tempted to deny it later. Silence didn't reduce the tension. It concentrated it. And that told me I was getting closer to the truth. At some point, what was happening stopped feeling like a private failure and started feeling logistical. It wasn't just about trust or intimacy anymore. It involved shared property, shared accounts, shared history that existed on paper whether the marriage survived or not. That realization changed how I moved. I stopped thinking in terms of confrontation and started thinking in terms of exposure, not public, not vindictive, just inevitable. When more than two people are involved, secrets don't stay contained. They migrate. They leak into schedules, finances, and other people's expectations. I scheduled a meeting with a lawyer on a weekday afternoon and didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't dramatize it in my own head either. I brought documents. Statements. Notes. The same way I'd bring plans to a job review. The lawyer listened, asked a few clarifying questions, and confirmed what I already suspected: nothing about this situation was isolated anymore. From that point on, I separated function from feeling. I opened a new account. I redirected income. I made copies of everything that mattered and stored them somewhere Lauren never went. I didn't hide assets. I didn't move money out of spite. I prepared for reality instead of hoping it would bend. The neighborhood started to feel smaller. Not hostile, just involved. Conversations lingered longer when I passed by. Questions arrived wrapped in casual concern. I answered them neutrally and said less than expected. Silence tends to make people fill in blanks on their own. Lauren sensed the shift but misread it. She assumed distance meant ignorance, that calm meant disengagement. She hadn't realized I was no longer trying to protect the image of us. I wasn't planning a reveal. I didn't need one. The truth was already moving outward, touching other people's routines, intersecting with spaces neither of us controlled. What we'd once planned together, a future built on assumptions, was now being replaced by something quieter and more durable: preparation. I didn't rush it.
I didn't slow it down. I let it progress at the speed it demanded. Because at that stage, the outcome no longer depended on me alone. The conversation didn't happen at home.
It didn't happen late at night or behind a closed door where voices could be raised and rewritten later. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, in the open, with people moving in and out of earshot and no room for revision. We were standing in the cul-de-sac during one of those neighborhood gatherings that pretends to be casual but isn't. Folding chairs. Paper plates. Small talk stretched thin. Lauren had been watching me all morning, waiting for something: anger, tension, a crack she could push against. I didn't give her one. When she finally cornered me near the driveway, her voice was already loaded. "We need to talk," she said, like she was still the one setting terms. I nodded once. Okay. That caught her off balance. She was expecting resistance. Or urgency. Or secrecy. She started anyway. Accusations wrapped in concern. Questions that weren't really questions. Emotional pressure applied in familiar ways. I let her talk without interrupting, without correcting, without stepping into the role she was used to assigning me. When she finished, I spoke quietly and said very little. "I'm aware of what's been happening," I said. "And I'm not interested in pretending otherwise." Her expression tightened. "You're imagining things." "I'm not," I said. "And I don't need to argue about it." She tried to pull it back into the old pattern: deflection, reversal, urgency. She lowered her voice. She raised it. She reached for history. I didn't follow. "This isn't the place," she said finally. "That's fine," I replied. "It's still the reality." People nearby had gone quiet in that way they do when something unspoken becomes visible. I wasn't performing for them. I didn't look at them. But I didn't protect her from them either. She realized then that I wasn't engaging, not because I was confused, but because I was finished. The conversation wasn't a negotiation. It was a boundary being stated out loud. She stopped talking first. And that told me everything I needed to know. After that afternoon, I stopped steering anything. I didn't correct rumors. I didn't clarify motives. I didn't rush outcomes. I let events move the way gravity intended, without my hand on them. Lauren tried to regain footing at first. Explanations surfaced indirectly, delivered through other people, softened and rephrased before they reached me. Stories changed shape depending on who was listening. I stayed out of it. The less I said, the more obvious the inconsistencies became. People notice silence. They read it as confidence or certainty, even when it's neither. They fill it with their own conclusions. I watched that happen in real time: neighbors drawing lines, conversations shifting tone, invitations becoming selective. Lauren's composure slipped in increments. Not publicly, at first. Privately. I could see it in the way she paced rooms, in the way her patience shortened, in how often she asked what people were saying. I answered honestly, "I don't know." Which was true. I wasn't tracking perception anymore. The lies lost efficiency. They required maintenance she could no longer manage. When one explanation fell apart, it pulled another with it. Timelines stopped matching. Alliances thinned. Silence from me forced her to speak more, to adjust more, to expose more. What surprised her most was that I didn't intervene to stop it. I didn't rescue the narrative. I didn't protect her from consequences that weren't mine to manage. I let other people reach their own understanding without commentary. At some point, she stopped trying to pull me back into the center of it. That was the clearest sign. When manipulation fails, it gets abandoned. Things didn't explode. They eroded. Slowly. Publicly enough to matter. Quietly enough to feel permanent. I wasn't in control anymore, and I didn't need to be. The situation no longer required my effort to move forward. It had momentum all its own. I focused on logistics. Timelines. Practical decisions.
I slept better once I accepted that the end wouldn't be loud.
It would simply arrive, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to hold together. There was no single moment where everything officially ended.
No slammed doors. No final argument that could be replayed later with different lines. The marriage didn't collapse, it concluded. Lauren moved out quietly. Not all at once. A few boxes at a time. Practical items first. Clothes. Files. Things that suggested she understood this wasn't temporary.
We spoke only when necessary, and even then, the conversations stayed narrow and functional.
Schedules. Access.
Logistics. What surprised me was the absence of triumph. I didn't feel relieved in the way people expect you to feel once something painful is finished. I felt settled. Like a weight had been redistributed evenly instead of pressing on one side of my chest.
The affair hadn't ended the marriage.
That was the cleanest truth I carried forward. What ended it was the moment I stopped lying to myself to keep it intact.
Everything after that was just alignment catching up. Neighbors adjusted. So did routines.
The house sounded different without her moving through it. Not emptier, just quieter in a way that made sense.
I fixed things that had been ignored. Reorganized spaces that no longer needed to accommodate two versions of reality. There were no speeches. No explanations delivered for closure. I didn't need them, and neither did she. Closure isn't something another person gives you.
It's something you arrive at when the story stops demanding revision.
I signed what needed signing.
I closed what needed closing. I didn't rush the next phase, and I didn't mourn the one that ended longer than necessary. Some things don't deserve prolonged grief once they've shown you what they are.
Looking back, the calm resolution confused people more than anger ever could have. But it wasn't restraint for their benefit. It was precision for mine. I didn't walk away unchanged. I walked away clear.
And that made all the difference. Life went on, the way it always does when you stop arguing with reality.
Mornings became quieter. Decisions became simpler.
I didn't feel lighter, exactly, but I felt steadier, like my footing finally matched the ground beneath me.
I didn't walk away with speeches or explanations. I walked away with boundaries.
Silence had done what exposure never could, it clarified what was mine to carry and what wasn't.
Patience isn't passive. It's deliberate. It's choosing not to interrupt the truth while it's unfolding.
I learned that waiting, when done with intention, has weight. It changes outcomes without announcing itself. I kept my dignity by refusing to perform pain for an audience. I kept my peace by not chasing understanding from someone who had already chosen distance. What I reclaimed wasn't pride or victory.
It was stability. The ability to trust my own perception again. The confidence to let things end without forcing them to. Some endings don't need noise. They need space.
And in that space, I found something solid enough to build on.